Good morning. My privilege to be here this morning. I have with me today the Assistant Commissioner, Bobby Straughter, over Community Supervision, that's probation and parole, and Dr. Marina Kodrechi, who's the Assistant Commissioner of Rehabilitated Services. This morning, we're going to talk a little bit, are the slides up? On sentencing, recidivism, and the positive impact of successful reentry. Listening to the presentations this morning, I always learn something, and hearing Director Gwynn talk about the 8 major areas where you have gang activities and increased gang activities. He talked about the largest city. I was sitting there thinking and started doing a little math, and my folks don't like for me to do math, so I won't mention numbers. It's really, corrections fall in there about the 7th or 8th largest city when we talk about the number of people that we supervise, both inside the prisons and inside the and community supervision. It's probably about 110,000, 111,000 offenders that we're responsible for. More than 30,000 of those are behind the wire, and the rest are in the community. That's why it's important that we really start to examine and talk about this. One of the things that, first part I want to talk about, just kind of quickly over the agenda where we will go. Talk about Governor's Task Force on Sentencing and Recidivism, the trends, sentencing, again, recidivism, and really reentry, and finally, where are we going forward? Start a little bit talking about the Governor's Task Force on Sentencing and Recidivism. Many of you in this room are part of that task force that was appointed back in the late summer, early fall. We've had 2 meetings since then, and really just want to give you a little bit of background about that task force. It was established with the Governor's Public Safety Sub-Cabinet as part of Tennessee's overall crime reduction and public safety improvement efforts. The Public Safety Sub-Cabinet, as you know, created an action plan that is working to significantly reduce drug abuse, drug trafficking, curb violent crimes, and cut the rate of repeat offenders. That plan has been in progress for more than 3 years, and Commissioner Gibbons talked about some of the successes that we've had, and we feel good about where we are and where we're going as a cabinet. The current sentencing structure in Tennessee, in place for more than 20 years, has a direct effect on reducing crime. While there has been a sound basis for responding to criminal behavior, periodic examinations to ensure that the structure is still commensurate with the variety and severity of the criminal behaviors that are warranted. Now, we also know that successful reentry of felons released to their communities from state and local correctional facilities play a critical role in reducing crime. Transformation of the state felon reentry process has already begun, and we can see that it's starting to curtail recidivism. Transfer of felony community supervision from the Board of Parole to the Department of Corrections. Seamless supervision, we believe, centralized intake coupled with validated risk assessment tools that guide targeted programming, not just putting people in prison to say you do A, you do B, but having a good assessment process will help us to impact reentry and recidivism. The task force that's been formed will receive technical assistance from the Vera Institute of Justice Center on Sentencing and Corrections. The Vera staff will conduct data and policy analysis, identify expertise and resources to support the work of the task force. They will also assist in facilitating meetings and assist in the development of the task force recommendations. It's important that we make note that this task force is about Tennessee. It's not about somebody coming in and telling us what we need and what we need to do. Our partners from the Vera Institute of Justice are our partners. In fact, that we've had the 2 previous meetings, and we came up with a lot of good things that going forward. But 2 things is that, one important thing is that we've broken that group down into 2 major divisions. One on sentencing that's being led by former Davidson County Attorney General Tory Johnson, and the second one is on recidivism that's being chaired by Linda Leathers, the CEO of the Next Door organization. We know that these groups will give us the focus, and they will be meeting over the next few months with some recommendations to the Public Safety Sub-Cabinet sometime in June of next year. So we're excited about that opportunity, and as we move forward and toward the end, we can address any questions or concerns you might have and talking about the task force. What I want to do now is really talk about why we really got to that task force and what we're doing in corrections to really impact reentry and recidivism. Just a little bit about where we are in terms of our population. If you look at that and look at admissions, and they've kind of targeted and hung around about anywhere from 13,000 to 14,000, but about 14,500 would be the average over the last 3 to 4 years in terms of what's coming into the system. Going out of the system, you can still see that we've averaged about 16,000 going out. Even with the ones, the increase in outweighing the ones coming in, that intake population has still been consistent in terms of what's happening in Tennessee. This next slide just kind of gives you a highlight of the average time served by type population. Overall system-wide, which includes our locally sentenced, the TDOC backup, those waiting to come into the system, and our TDOC in-house population, the average sentence is about 4.2 years. So what that tells us is that most of the folks coming into the system will go home. In fact, we know it's a little bit more than 90% of offenders that come into the system eventually will go home. That gives us a responsibility not to just warehouse, but try to make a positive difference in their lives, because we know what's happening on the outside. Our law enforcement and the folks in this room are working hard to ensure that we continue to protect the public. And anything that we do in terms of how we structure programming, how we manage our beds, is about impacting positively public safety. This slide presents population projections. We feel good about the model that we're utilizing to look at where would the population be. Over the next 5 years, we can anticipate a 9% growth in that population if we do nothing at all. If we just continue the way we're going, not try to work on the different strategies that we'll talk about in just a few minutes, but just let it roll, that population is projected to go up to more than 32,000 offenders. Let's talk a little bit about what we can do as an agency, and we call this our area of influence. And this simple formula that we use to kind of structure and build on our programmings, and it's simply we say is that admissions times the length of stay, whether that's in our jail, in our diagnostic facility, or in the state prison, equals taxpayer dollars, which equals public safety. You know, we don't have a infinite amount of money to just kind of do what we want to do. We have to structure and build programs that we know make a difference. When we start to talk about admissions, you know, folks say, well, what can you do about admissions? You're not part of the sentencing process. But there are things we can do from the community supervision side to influence the process of those that are coming back on revocations. We have to strengthen that process and ensure that we have a consistent and fair process for those in the community. What that means is about increased supervision of those offenders, managing by risk, ensuring that we can reduce that more than 40% that we bring back on revocations, not just to say we're not doing it, but to have a safe method in doing that. We've got to ensure that we maximize what's happening in the jails, from programming to ensuring that we have good processes to get folks out of the jails into our system as quickly and as safely as possible. One thing we did was look at that entire process and how we get people out of the county jails and what happens when they go into what we call our diagnostic or our intake facilities in terms of how long they stay there. We had, over a period of time, averaging anywhere from 90 days to sometimes 6 months staying in that diagnostic facility. We also had 3 of those across the state. So we reduced that to 1 intake facility for males and 1 for females. Examine the processes, ensure that we had good systems in place, redefine and make sure we had a good risk needs assessment so that we can identify what the programmatic needs are, so that when they arrive at their first institution, that we know that if you got 50 years, we're not going to send you right to programming. You're going to get some basic programs at the intake facility, but once we know if you 4 years or less or 5 years or less, we know to get you in program so that we can get you ready for that process. That takes us to that next one, length of stay in prisons. We're not talking about letting people out early. We're talking about ensuring that we know what your program plan is, what you need, and what it takes to get you in the door, out the door. And if you're going before the parole board, that you've had the program and we know what programs are required, you got the first seat in there if that's your time frame, so that when you get to the parole board, they have the information they need to make a good decision, and that you followed the program plan that was designed for you. So, at the end of the day, how we manage prisons, what we do inside that, really impacts the dollars in terms of managing that population. So we feel it's important that we look at how we examine that from start to finish, not just to get people out to save money, but to do the right thing. As you heard previously, we're locking up a lot more violent offenders. And we want to reserve those beds. Those beds are tough beds, those hard beds, for those violent offenders that really need to be in there, that we can secure and get them out of those county jails as quickly as possible. Now, this is something that we like to kind of demonstrate and just kind of show you a what if. And when we start looking at budget impact, because the more we take from our budget, the more in our budget, it could take away from other things. So we want to be able to ensure that we maximize those resources. And the slide just kind of illustrates, if we started today with a 1,000-bed prison, at the average cost per day, that would be about just annually $24 million. But we found ways to reduce that population by using good alternative supervision in the community if the appropriate offender fits that category. Reduce that by $100, you get a cost of avoidance of about $2.4 million. And the bottom portion of that is really what if, a big what if. You look at sentencing in length in terms of months versus sentencing in terms of years. And if you just look at that top part, and 1 year, for a 1-year sentence, again, $24.5 million. But if it was a 9-month sentence, just on that same 1,000 numbers that were incarcerated, you can get a cost avoidance of about $6.1 million. And that's real money when you really take a look at it in terms of what we do. And you just kind of expand that over a 3-year period, and you see a similar impact. 36 months or 3 years versus 30 months, you can see where the numbers really start to add up and can have a significant impact. And again, those are just some of the what-if things in terms of looking at how we manage and what we think about and what we communicate with the different organizations about the what-if. Nothing in concrete, just throwing things out there for folks to take a look at. Now, when we talk about conviction and sentencing, and most people in here are very familiar with this, but we know where to go and the possibilities of what happens coming in. Our community corrections, they could go to probation, recovery courts that we're really partnering with the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse that really starting to make a big difference there. Of course, ultimately, state prison and local jails. Even with that, there are some alternatives that we know that they have from the prison or jail. We still have boot camp. There's a parole technical violators unit. We also have a probation technical violators unit. But on the other side of there are probation community impact programs. We know in terms of being able to address alternatives that our judges and our DAs, they really want to know that we got good resources and good supervision strategies in the community so that they feel comfortable that if they use an alternative, that the offenders will be appropriately supervised. Next slide, just kind of for everybody's, so we're operating on the same definition of recidivism, is really, here in Tennessee, we measure a rearrest, a return to prison within 3 years after your initial release. And you look at the numbers statewide, Tennessee is about 46%. And when you break it down for those that are in the state system versus those that are in the local jails, 38 versus 51%. The biggest part of that, in terms of that, is the programming piece. We know the resources are strained on our communities, and we are working to see how we can address some of those programmatic issues in our local jails. Nationally, the recidivism rate is about 6 to 8%. So when you look at where we are there, we're not as bad off as some, but we can be a lot better. Some of the barriers to success is the lack of suitable housing, meaningful employment, educational deficiencies, mental health and substance abuse aftercare, and lack of vital records and birth certificates. In just a second, we'll talk about some of the things we're doing to address those. But I want to thank our partners that work with us, and we work together in the safety sub-cabinet, because all of these things we've been able to address for the offenders here in Tennessee. Many of you heard that reentry starts at intake. That's our classification process. Once we get them in the door, the work begins. We got a team of folks led by Dr. Kadrechi and Ms. Duffield out there that really make a difference in terms of starting to prepare what happens. We all know that just putting them in prison without a good risk needs assessment is just warehousing folks. That's why we went to the single diagnostic process, so we get them in there. We know what they need. We have limited amount of resources, so we got to get the right person in the right program at the right time to ensure that we have the right impact of them coming back into the community. The case plan and the reentry is an ongoing process. We work closely with the parole board, ensuring that we want to get it right. We want to get the offender prepared, that what they need based on recommendations from the parole board early and not after the fact. That reentry will be that they can either have access to services once they transition to the community, pick up right where they left off. Part of the seamless supervision model is that we would lose offenders in that handoff from coming to prison, going on parole, or picking up back up on probation. This seamless supervision model was designed to limit those handoffs so that we don't miss anything. From whether Joe's in the community on probation or on parole or back in prison and back out, it's still Joe. So that supervision needs to be one person where we're not competing for resources, but we're maximizing those resources to supervise and program that offender. Some of the ongoing initiatives that we have, we talked about drug court, and I want to say Judge Norman, who really pulled me in when I first got here and educated me and re-educated me on drug courts. And we're making some significant headway from the sub-cabinet in terms of putting more of those across the state. Our probation and technical violators unit is that we know that when they're out there, we use that same model with the parole revocation unit, is that everybody shouldn't, their next stop for a technical violation shouldn't always have to be back in prison. Again, so can we do some quick intervention and work with our district attorneys and the judges to make a difference in that manner? Day reporting centers are like one-stop shops for our folks in the community supervision, where they can come if they need education or they need jobs, just need somebody to come in and talk to. Those day reporting centers will be available. We're continuing to do things like the Take One program, that we know that we're not in this by ourselves. We know that it takes a community to really help manage these offenders. That's why we've asked faith-based nonprofit organizations to work with the department and our volunteers to come in, and just like a mentoring program, 6 to 12 months outside of before the offenders are released. Trained volunteers will come in and make an agreement, say, all right, we'll take this individual and help them transition from prison back to the community. So far, we have a little bit over 100 organizations signed up, and we've made 44 matches since June of this year. The identification partnership with the Department of Safety and Homeland Security. We know our offenders leaving out, they need an ID, a valid state ID. Thanks to the work, the partnership with the Department of Safety and Homeland Security, we now in corrections have the ability to process state identification cards for offenders leaving. Their birth certificates and social security cards, all those are done on the front end. So we order those when they come in. When they leave out, they have that packet of identification with them. That starts to eliminate those barriers. They get out, well, where's your social security? Well, you've been locked up for 5 years. We got a responsibility to help prepare them. So we're a good team of folks working on that and doing that. Our partnership with housing partnerships. We know some offenders don't have a place to go, and so they stay incarcerated because they don't have that place. We're partnering with the housing authorities in terms of what we do getting out versus taking it and give one organization an ability to have transitional housing. We are able to spread that throughout the state through approved housing by the parole board. Some of the impacts that we're starting to see. Those numbers will populate. But really, you look at preparing folks to come out of the system, and these are some of the things that we're doing. The Morgan Recovery Court, our drug court, 84 participants going through there over the last year. 9,000 job opportunities within there where we develop skills. Our partners are with TriCore, assisting in that. More than 1,100 offenders trained, and will eventually get out with a very technical skill. The HiSET or GED, 236 successful graduates this year. Substance abuse use treatment, more than 1,200 in those programs. Adult basic education, you see the numbers. So it's not that they're just sitting in prison. We are really preparing these folks to get the skills they need to get out. We know, again, more than 90% will come out. So while they're there, we're going to really invest in the time and make sure they get what they need. So what next going forward? We're going to continue to work with our partners throughout the state. We're going to continue to look at what's happening with our sentencing and recidivism task force. We feel good about where we're on those. Breaking it down in those two particular areas, I think you all will hear more coming forward, that this is not about corrections. One of the main reasons we looked at that was that we started to look at the things we're doing internally, and we realized that we are really up against an entire state in terms of where we're going, and we need help. So part of the task force is getting you all re-engaged with us, making a difference in terms of moving forward. We'll continue to look for ensuring that our programs are evidence-based and not just feel-good programs. We want to ensure that they are making that difference with the offenders before they get out, not just be in a program and say we're doing this, but we want it to be evidence-based. We're also looking to partner with a university to further evaluate the programs that we're presenting. We want to make sure that what we're doing and what we say the results are really what's happening here in Tennessee. So that concludes the formal portion of the presentation, and I believe we can have an opportunity for questions and answers at this time, and have Dr. Codretti and Assistant Commissioner Strouder to answer all your questions. Okay. Y'all ready? They look surprised. Questions from anyone? There's a question there. Yes, ma'am.
My question has two parts. One, I like this idea of the Take One program. Are you connecting with all the faith-based organizations and the churches, or do they need to contact the correctional facility within their area? How is that linkage going to happen?
Yeah. It goes both ways. We initially did some recruiting. We went out and we had, in the 3 grand divisions, there are, I guess, boards that have been established that will solicit in their particular areas. We started big, then we broke it down by the geographical regions. On our website, TDOC, Tennessee.gov/corrections, there's a link to take you there to get what you need. But we'll pick up your contact information if you have specifics and make sure we get with you.
Okay, and my second question, thank you, is, and looking at the information of how you're helping people, and it may be addressed in the afternoon, but how do you handle the mental health aspect of those that have mental illness that come out? Are they getting the assistance in the prison so that they don't come back, you know, and stop that loop? What is happening there?
I'm going to ask Dr. Codretti, who used to be our mental health director, to talk about that, please.
Hello, everybody. We assess every inmate, every offender that comes to us, and we assign them a level of care, and we provide services in our prisons depending on that level of care. Upon reentry, we also assess them and see what kind of community care they need. Do they need residential treatment, or do they need outpatient services? And with clinical case management, we had been able to actually file for either disability or ensure continuity of services in the community.
Other questions? Someone up front.
I notice you have a relationship with the drug court. Is there an established relationship with the Veterans Court?
Not at the same level that we have with our recovery courts, but we are reaching out, working with the Department of Veteran Services in terms of how we get there, so far as to even look at establishing veteran dorms within a veterans unit within the system in terms of addressing those needs.
I think you've answered my other question
Yes, sir.
already. Thank you.
Looks like no more questions, I guess it's Commissioner Gibbons. Thank you all for your attention. Appreciate it.